Hey, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. And in case you're wondering, yes, Washington is as ridiculous as ever. Been watching this Pete Hegseth confirmation hearing all day today. We've broken it down into digestible components. We'll share that with you in just a moment. Coming up, Erik Prince will join us, former U.S. Navy SEAL, founder of Blackwater, founder of Unplugged Technologies. He'll react to Pete Hegseth's big hearing today before the United States Senate. 4 o'clock, you will hear this man sing next week at the inauguration. Christopher Macchio, the opera singer, will join us. We'll ask him all about what that's been like on the campaign trail and now going to the inauguration. Josh Hammer is here at 4:30 from the Article 3 Project and the Josh Hammer Show. We talked to him about Jack Smith's big report, the guy who's unconstitutionally been a special counsel. And then Bill Brown, former Navy SEAL, is with us today. He organized a march of these veterans who were all present today to support Pete Hegseth. We will talk to Bill about why he organized this, what he saw today in that hearing, and where he thinks everything should go next. You should join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. It really is hilarious, unbelievably funny to me to watch people like Elizabeth Warren and Dick Blumenthal challenge Pete Hegseth about his resume. Warren, who spent her entire professional life lying about being a Native American, has a lot of questions for Pete Hegseth about his past. Really? Yeah, she was something else. Richard Blumenthal doing the same thing. You know, of course, he lied about serving in the Vietnam War, did no such thing. So these guys are really, really the perfect people to be drilling Pete Hegseth today on why should he become Secretary of Defense. And this is, I mean, there's endless stuff to choose from. Let me just start. I'll do inverse pyramid in journalism for you. This is where we start. I'll just give you the big news today. Pete Hegseth did great. He did. He definitely followed the guidance he received. He kept a cool head. He answered all of the questions. He didn't allow himself to be sucked into traps that Democrats were attempting to lay. The when did you stop beating your wife arrangement of some of these questions. He just didn't fall for it. And so for that reason, he did a good job. Also, he clearly had, as far as I could tell, the support of all of the Republicans on the panel, to include Joni Ernst, who was, remember, she was the question mark. And apparently, they even had an exchange today saying it's been very frank between the two of them, but she seemed very encouraged by the answers he gave her both behind closed doors and openly during today's public testimony, suggesting that it's basically going to be Republicans who get Pete Hegseth across the finish line here, and or at least out of this committee. And Democrats are just playing stupid partisan games, like disgusting partisan games with this nomination. Pete Hegseth is a total breath of fresh air. He is not a part of a corrupt establishment that has only existed for a long time to serve itself. And in his opening testimony today, he made it really clear what he wants to do with this job, that he wants to elevate the standards of the United States military, that he wants to focus on meritocracy, he wants to focus on lethality, and he wants to purge politics from the ranks. No more politicizing the American military. No more wokeness all over the place. Our standards will be high. Our standards will be equal. And the word equitable, that's not going to be a part of this. Take a listen. Here's Pete Hegseth today.
Our standards will be high and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapon system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. The Democrats on the committee today, they did a deep dive into every television broadcast that Pete Hegseth has ever been a part of, the book or books that he's written, the veterans organizations that he was a part of, and they were looking to essentially cherry pick quotes designed to try and
make him look bad. But what I found today is every time they would bring up one of these quotes, first of all, if he could even place it in history, he would. And then he would give a perfectly good explanation for what he meant at the time, whether he was talking about women in combat or any number of other issues. The left would basically try and give it the worst possible spin you could come up with, and then Pete would very adeptly, because he's good at this, he's good at communicating, he would very adeptly explain what he was thinking. In fact, at one point, ranking member Democrat Jack Reed of Rhode Island asked Pete Hegseth to explain a term that he had reportedly used to describe some JAG officers that he had been working with. This is not all JAG officers. That would be legal lawyers in the military, but some JAG officers. And here's what Jack Reed asked.
You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
Because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reed.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Reed.
you very much.
Interesting. The guy does. He's like, what is a jag off? Can you explain that to me? Don't you love when these senators, they ask about these old quotes and they're like, can you explain what that means? Remember from the Brett Kavanaugh hearing? You remember Sheldon Whitehouse, who was asking Brett Kavanaugh to explain boofing? Remember this?
Have you, I don't know if it's boofed or boofed. How do you pronounce that?
That refers to flatulence. We were 16.
Okay. And so when your friend Mark Judge put the same thing in his yearbook page back to you, he had the same meaning. It was flatulence.
I don't know what he did, but that's my recollection. We want to talk about flatulence at age 16 on a yearbook page. I'm game.
Thanks for wasting everybody's time, Sheldon Whitehouse. And that was a good sign early, by the way. If Jack Reed is asking him to give him definitions on stupid, casual conversations that he's having with his fellow service members, you know that they really don't have much to go on, do they? If the ranking member is spending his time on that, yeah, it's really stupid. Pete Hegseth said a lot of right things today, including that there hasn't been any accountability. All of this stuff about, like, are you the right guy? Are you the right guy? Well, how about everyone who has been in this job before him? How about all of the senior leadership of the military, all the political class that has not done so well? Here is Pete Hegseth saying, well, wait a second. Look at the Biden administration. There's been no accountability for Afghanistan.
There's been no accountability for the disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And that's precisely why we're here today. Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
These Democrats hated when he used his time effectively, and you could hear them. They kept interrupting him. No, I don't want you talking about that very important topic. I want you to talk about the nonsense I'm putting in front of you. I'm trying to make you look bad. Will you stop? That's the whole thing. Democrat Jean Shaheen today, New Hampshire. What do you say to women in our military who believe they should have a fair shot to rise through the ranks?
Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks? If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective.
He never said that. He never said any of the things that she's saying. They make our military less effective.
Are not competent.
Is what she's saying.
They make our military less effective. And on the other hand, you say, oh, no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military.
These are stupid word games that the left is playing. Pete has done a number of interviews through the years, including one on a podcast, a Sean Ryan podcast a couple months ago, where he thinks that it's a bad idea that we, as a matter of policy, push women to frontline combat roles. But he didn't say that women shouldn't serve in combat zones. In fact, he reflected on his own service and was talking about how excellent the women that he served with were and have been. And yet the Democrats refuse to make any distinctions here whatsoever. Pete kept saying, look, this is about standards. I'm saying I don't want standards lowered in order to force women into combat. We shouldn't be doing that. We should have a sky-high, gender-neutral standard, and if you pass it, then you're in. But we shouldn't lower standards to artificially inflate the number of women who are in combat. There is no man or woman who pays attention to this issue with seriousness who disagrees with that. But, of course, the left wants to turn this into some sort of sexist thing.
What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us.
There he goes. So he's better than they are. Let's be honest. He's way better than they are. Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, she was shrieking for a bit.
You were on TV. I get you were helping veterans. I get it was a different job. But most recently, you said this in November of 2024, knowing full well you might have been named.
Would this have been a bad time for Pete to say, calm down? Senator, calm down. A little slower so we can all understand you.
As Secretary of Defense. So please explain these types of statements, because they're brutal and they're mean. And they disrespect men and women who are willing to die for this country.
What are you, a child? You're being so mean. This is not high school, Senator. This is not high school. And also, once again, you're distorting all of his public commentary on these issues intentionally. Pete has also previously said that he thinks it's a bad idea that the military be infected by leftism, that injecting politics has not actually made the military more effective. He's right about that. Kirsten Gillibrand, of course, once again distorts that talking point into something nonsensical.
The statements you said about people who have views differently than you, that we're the enemy, are you saying that 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo.
Yeah. And what lunatic would identify Pete Hegseth as an extremist for a Christian tattoo? If you had to pick a political ideology that might lead to such a stupid decision, that would be the left. That would be the left. So when Pete's talking about purging that, that's the exact kind of thing he's referring to. And he even said today, if this happened to me just because I have a Christian tattoo, imagine how often this has been happening to men and women in uniform all across our country for all sorts of reasons, that type of treatment. So he's once again right, and that's that story in which he's the victim. It's a perfect example of where this leftism needs to be purged as a primary driving force within the United States military, which, of course, the Biden administration has worked very aggressively to put in there, right? What was it? The very first days of the administration, they slandered the entire military. They suggested that extremism was running wild in the American military. Do you remember that in 2021? National stand-down order. Everybody needed to get a brief on extremism, be on guard for it. And then they conducted some studies on the issue. And what did the studies reveal? Oh, that there were no extremists. They found a handful of people who were gang members in the United States military. That was it. And so when they had the results of that, Lloyd Austin and company, when the Pentagon had the results in this study that there wasn't actually a meaningful presence of extremists in the military, did they come back and did they tell the whole country? Did they blare the trumpets? What great news. Our military is wonderful. No, they didn't. They released it in the dead of night over a holiday weekend to prevent anybody from focusing on it. They didn't want people to know that the good men and women of the military are not as extreme as the left wanted you to think they were, as the Biden administration wanted you to think they were. So it's way past time for a change in leadership. Way past time. And the idea that the very demons who are responsible for destroying such a great institution as the American military can sit up on that dais and then kick the tires on Pete Hegseth and then be like, I'm not sure you're qualified for this. The reason they're against him is because he would put a stop to their agenda, that he is not a willing servant of the status quo, of the establishment. And as a result, they need to fight tooth and nail to stop him. All the more reason he needs to prevail. I've got more audio coming up for you from this wild hearing today. I've crazy Mazie Hirono. I hope I can get to her. Kind of amazing. And then, of course, Erik Prince is going to join us coming up here in a few minutes. We got to talk to him about what he thought of Pete Hegseth's hearing today. A lot of great moments today with Pete Hegseth. I'll see what I can do to get to all of them. Never going to get to everything. We're going to try, though. But your calls are coming in. Joe is in Greenbelt on line 3. Joe, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Yeah, I was telling your call screener, the standards are not the same for women. They're lower. They don't have to do as many push-ups. They don't have to do as many sit-ups. They don't have to run as fast. And I'm sure it's through every other area as well. I mean, for instance, when I was in basic training, we had to carry our stuff on our back, our gear, to the bivouac site. When I was on the plane coming back from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, one of the ladies that was also being trained there, she told me all their stuff was trucked in. And when they go to qualify, they go to the easy ranges.
Mm-hmm.
I know that because I was sent to the range with a unzeroed weapon and I bowload.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go again. They sent me to the easy range. Well, guess who was at the easy range? All the women. So, I mean, and it goes all the way down through things that I can't even think of. I mean, it's just, and it's not just the standards that they don't meet. The problem is it causes love triangles. You can't have an army of all women. So there's only going to be a few women in. There's not enough to go around. Guys, you know, they're fighting over the girls.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a problem.
Yeah.
And the guys get shot in the back, and, it's an accident. Well, it's probably because they're fighting over the girl.
That could be a problem. That could be a problem. Joe, thank you. Yeah, no, you're having an honest conversation. What you're discussing is like, okay, let's just be honest about what's going on in the military. That's not the kind of conversation Washington is accustomed to. Everything is fantasy land in Congress. They play all these stupid games. Pete Hegseth hopefully will break that spell, at least when it comes to the military. He spoke very highly of the women he served with, and I know a lot of veterans who do, a lot of great female veterans, but even among the female veterans, they'll admit, yeah, there are some issues, and I bet you a bunch of them are going to share Joe's opinion on some of that too. All right, stay with us. Erik Prince will be with us. We're going to talk to him about what he thought of today's hearing and Pete's chances of becoming the next Secretary of Defense. Good afternoon to you. 3:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Where we are making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Christopher Macchio joins us at 4 o'clock, the famous opera singer who will be performing at President Trump's inauguration next week. You saw him on the campaign trail throughout. Can't wait to talk to him about what to expect this coming Monday. Josh Hammer will be with us at 4:30 from the Article 3 Project as Jack Smith releases his final book report, and we're all supposed to be scandalized by it. We'll talk to Josh about that. And then Bill Brown is here at 5 o'clock. Former Navy SEAL. He organized all of these veterans to march in support of Pete Hegseth today, so many of them inside of that hearing room today. We'll talk to Bill about it. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
The disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
Pete Hegseth saying the Afghanistan withdrawal, a disaster. There's been no accountability for that. And he says he represents a big change in the leadership class when it comes to the Pentagon as the incoming Secretary of Defense. For more on Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing today, and how it went and where do we go from here, we bring in Erik Prince now, former U.S. Navy SEAL, founder of Blackwater and the founder of Unplugged Technologies. Erik, good to have you back with us, sir.
Nice to be with you, Vince.
As far as I'm concerned, it did seem like a breath of fresh air for Pete Hegseth to be the guy who's being considered for this role. What did you think of today's hearing?
Well, I think it's a clear contrast of the problem in Washington, that you have Democrats throwing bombs at this guy who have never served or actively avoided service. And the problem in Washington is you have people making decisions that never have to live with the bad decisions they make. They have no skin in the game.
Yeah.
So you have Richard Blumenthal actively avoided Vietnam service while in the reserves, got 5 deferments. So you have so many people that are the wrong decision makers. And I'm happy for the first time we have a veteran that served in combat, that's had to live with the bad decisions made by senior officers to be actually in a position of authority to make it right. He's right. We do need a return to lethality and merit. That's the only 2 things the Pentagon should be concerned with. The very, very best people, the most qualified, doesn't matter what gender they are, but how good are they at destroying the enemy?
Do you think that would represent a revolutionary change for the Pentagon to focus on that? Because I think most people probably looked at the Pentagon through the years and thought, well, of course, that's what they have to be focused on. They're the American military, killing bad guys. Would Pete Hegseth represent a change?
It's exceedingly dangerous for the American people to assume the U.S. military will win every conflict. We haven't won any war, really, in the last 30 years. We get chased out of Afghanistan, having spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, defeated by largely 25 to 30,000 illiterate goat herders that receive no external support in the Taliban. You get pushed out of Iraq by Iranian subterfuge and covert action. We have the major shipping way, the Red Sea, shut off by the Houthis right now, who, incidentally, the Biden administration also pulled off the terror list before they did that. And just today, the Biden administration takes the Cubans off the terror list. So it's a clear contrast of leadership and a very different view of the world. And that may play out as some theatrics in Congress.
Yes.
But it's a very clear paradigm shift, and it could not come soon enough because our enemies are not afraid. Our allies wonder what the hell we're doing. And we have a serious collapse in deterrence, which needs to be rectified. You have a massively overpopulated general officer class. You have the same amount of generals now that you did during World War II. But you have about 1.4 million active duty now. You had 12 million, 14 million in World War II. So in a time where you should have flat, fast digital communications and a lean management team, we have a very bloated headshed, 10 times the size it should be. And Pete Hegseth definitely has his work cut out to slim this whole thing down.
Yeah. And you're right to point out that the very senators who are angry about Pete Hegseth possibly becoming the next Secretary of Defense, many of these people were people who voted for all of the very kind of the quagmires that we've been in through these decades. And even like Elizabeth Warren today, she had this exchange where she was saying demanding that Pete Hegseth swear that he never become a defense contractor in the wake of being Secretary of Defense. But the irony of her saying something like that is she literally voted for Lloyd Austin. She confirmed him. He came right from Raytheon to be the Secretary of Defense. And so, all these guys are talking right out of both sides of their mouths.
It's shocking to see Democrats defending what has been the status quo, which is absolutely failure on top of failure. When you have bad leadership at the top, it causes a true lack of confidence of young people that want to say, yeah, I want to join. I'm willing to sacrifice a few years of my life to go serve my country, to learn something, to gain a skill. And when there's bad leadership, they vote with their feet. And they have been significant cause of undermanning. And that needs to be reversed. So it's Pete Hegseth needs to focus on 2 things: lethality and merit.
Lethality and merit.
And if we do that, we get back to a direction of a military that serves the United States of America by actually deterring our enemies from doing dumb things against us, bad things.
Yes.
And can do it at a rate that we can afford. At close to $1 trillion of consumption, we cannot afford to spend more on defense, but we can squeeze a hell of a lot of fat away and get a lot more bang for our buck. There's 2 things a military commander does. They coordinate information and they release energy. Drive that ship from here to there, march that formation up that mountain, or fire that weapon at the enemy. The problem is the cost of energy, the cost of putting warheads on foreheads, of delivering weapons onto the enemy has gotten so completely out of whack in the U.S. military. It's one of the reasons we can't win a war, because our stuff just costs too much and we're hyper bureaucratic, and that whole thing needs to be thinned out severely.
So one of the phrases that kept coming up today, Pete Hegseth used it a couple times, was referring to the so-called valley of death in military contracting, like when a technology comes online and its ability to become something operational in the military, and so many promising technologies sort of fall by the wayside. He seemed to be suggesting that it's a very corrupt process that is not actually yielding good results for the American military and, of course, their effectiveness. What do you think of that pipeline?
I completely agree with that statement. The problem, the entire Pentagon bureaucracy is a revolving door with the 5 super major defense contractors. Back in the 90s, you had almost 100 major defense contractors. The Clinton administration consolidated that down to 5. That's one of the reasons we pay way too much for any of these weapon systems. On top of that, you have a overlayered bureaucracy, procurement bureaucracy, which is far separated from the actual end user, the soldiers, sailors in the field. And so these people in Washington are making decisions based on politics, based on input from congressmen, not based on what the actual end user needs. The most expensive weapon system in human history, the F-35, is I think it's at operational readiness now of 29%. Okay, so we have some major problems from these big defense primes, and with all the small innovation, whether it's somebody coming up with it in their garage or a small startup, it's impossible for them to sell to the Pentagon because the rules are so completely stacked against them. Mm-hmm. That's the valley of death he's referring to, that these folks come up with a great idea, they submit it for field testing, and then they don't hear. And it goes, so they get smashed, bankruptcy, and one of the major primes buys it, and then ends up charging 5 to 10 times what the unit price should have been. Okay, there's lots of cases like that. I mean, the main drone the Navy used during the War on Terror was originally developed by guys that developed it for tuna fishing, but they couldn't sell it to the Pentagon, so Boeing bought the whole company and charged about 5x what the unit cost was before. So there's lots of stories like that. This is a fixable problem, but again, this audience, I'm sorry, Vince, your audience lives off the fat and the grotesque overspending that happens in Washington. And I hope 4 years from now, there's a lot less government money flowing through this area. It would be much healthier for the Republic.
Yes, I just want to offer the caveat. Not the entirety of this audience, but yes, some number of people within the audience are beneficiaries of that system that you're talking about.
No, the counties surrounding Washington, D.C., I do not mean to insult your audience.
Yeah, we have the best audience. They're the guys on the inside trying to break it up. Okay, but as we look at this, in other words, what you're describing is, in Washington, it's always like, well, you can't cut funding to the military. We need every single dollar we can possibly get into the military. What you're saying is actually there's a lot of fat that can be cut. We can save a tremendous amount of money and make the military more lethal, more effective, and take better care of the troops.
Yes. Whether it's when somebody enlists for a 4-year Navy enlistment, the Navy only gets about 1 to 1.5 years of deployability out of that person because there's so much time wasted in the school process.
Yeah.
So there's just fat upon stupidity in these pipelines that any level of efficiency or discipline applied to the system is going to ring significant rewards. I've done turnaround in businesses before.
Yep.
The Pentagon is like one large organism that desperately needs a diet, and it would perform better. Do you want Mark Milley running a triathlon, or do you want a 22-year-old stud, fresh out of college and fit? The Pentagon looks and acts like Mark Milley at that weight class, and the whole thing needs a diet.
That image is vivid. I see it now.
And I do mean to fat shame. You have an enormous amount of obesity, even amongst the general officer ranks, and I call BS on it. And Pete Hegseth, as SecDef, should call all of them out and observe their fitness tests.
Yes.
And let's prove, again, it comes down to leadership, because the lower ranks are maybe held to some kind of standard on the physical fitness tests. The upper ranks, they get people to, it's called pencil whipping. They write in what the answer has to be instead of what it actually is.
Can I just?
That is wrong. Leadership starts at the top, and
Yes.
if I were Pete Hegseth, I would line them all up and do it right outside the Pentagon for all to watch.
I love that. That's a great idea. I was talking to somebody who's in military medicine recently. He was telling me that that there's a lot of people who are leaving the military getting huge disability payments because they're obese. I was like, really? Obesity is a basis for disability? He's like, yeah. And I was that's crazy to me that you could. So you get payments for the rest of your life because you're fat?
Yes. On top of we're on the hook for $1 trillion in additional medical payments for Iraq and Afghanistan alone.
Wow.
You had yes. It's staggering. The peak cost of medical spending for World War II was not until the 1980s. So that's something we'll be spending on for the next 40 years at least.
It's amazing.
So
in other words, there's a lot of problems. You talked about kind of the onboarding of new troops, getting them into the military. You know, you got to factor in the amount of time it takes to recover from the trans surgeries too. I mean, that's a huge deal. Of course, I'm kidding, but that's one of these issues. That's one of these issues, though, that is coming up in the hearing today. The left is trying to make a mockery of all of this, but it is legitimate insofar as the military has all of this woke interference going on, and it has nothing to do with actually winning wars.
I was at a dentist today, and I was reminiscent of having to get dental care before going on dive status in the Navy. And if you're the things that military service requires at the leading dangerous edge are real and significant, and therefore safety matters. You can't be diving if you have any kind of cavities, because your tooth can explode when it comes under pressure and it releases. But imagine what trans surgery does to deployability and readiness. So again, all these incremental bad decisions have been made by very unserious people that have no business being anywhere near responsibility or life and death combat readiness decisions.
Yep.
And when the global war on terror started, there was no headcount reduction. There was no house cleaning of old dead wood in the officer ranks. Instead, they were all promoted and have all floated up to the top.
Yeah.
When Marshall took over as Chief of Staff in the Army, September 1, 1939, he immediately started cutting the dead wood because he saw a fight coming. He took over the day that the Nazis invaded Poland. He got the Army ready. That has never happened for the last 25 years, and the bloat and ineffectiveness of our military in many of these theaters is the clear indication of that problem.
And General Marshall was responsible for the plucking board, removing each of these guys from the top. And there's been some chatter.
Lots of generals and lots of colonels, and it desperately needs to be done now.
Yeah, there's been some reporting that President Trump is considering that. I hope he considers that very seriously. That could be very good for us. In the meantime, Erik Prince, thank you. Really appreciate your insights into this important topic. Always good to talk to you. Just a few days away now from the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. It's going to be very busy in the days ahead. But among the people who will be in town, my next guest, the opera singer Christopher Macchio. Guy's got an incredible voice. Makes him an opera singer. President Trump loves him. We'll chat with Christopher Macchio about what we might expect at that big, glamorous inauguration next week. Stay with us on The Vince Coglianese Show.